Jason Kenney, obviously a lot to talk about here at the convention, but perhaps the most important question is who will be the leader? A lot of people waiting to see what you decide, holding off on endorsing other candidates. When will you let people know your decision?
First of all, I want to say congratulations, Ezra, to you and the Rebel for your success and your big presence here. It's great to have alternative conservative media at the Conservative Convention so we can communicate a message without a nasty filter.
Thank you.
Having said that, look, our leadership election is a year from now, 12 months from now. The average duration of a leadership election in a Canadian political party is about 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
And I really don't believe it's to anyone's advantage for us to have a year-long, or in some cases, 18 candidates have been out there for 18 months before our May 2017 date.
So why did the party choose such a long runway? And a high membership fee, $25 to join. I don't get it.
Well, I think those are good questions. I think they wanted time for the party to be able to recuperate from the election defeat last October, which, let's face it, wasn't a pleasant experience. It was demoralizing for a lot of people. They wanted us to think through the implications of that, and so I can understand having a later date, but I'm not going to cooperate in a year-long sort of U.S.-style primary schedule,
right,
where we spend enormous amounts of internal resources talking about ourselves rather than holding Justin Trudeau and his Liberals to account. On the $25 fee, totally agree with you. I wrote an op-ed and a letter to all of our national councillors on our governing body saying that it was a way of erecting barriers to participation. We should be lowering them. They agreed. They repealed that. We're back to a $10 fee, or I believe. So, but I'll be making up my mind by the end of this summer. I am humbled by the enormous expression of support I get amongst my fellow Conservatives here. They're family for me. I've been in this movement for 25 years or longer, and I've been often on the front lines. And I want to make sure that's the right decision for me, Ezra. I've been in Parliament for 19 years, and whoever's offering to be a leader has to be committed to spend a decade or more at this.
Yeah.
That's a very serious long-term commitment. As somebody who has been on over 1,600 flights and over 2,000 nights in hotel rooms in the last decade, I know what the price is.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy and automatic decision for me.
Yeah. Now, just the other day I saw you say publicly that you support Rona Ambrose. You think she's doing a good job and she should contemplate running for the permanent leader instead of interim. Is that certainly sounds to me like you wouldn't be saying that if you yourself were going to run.
I don't agree. First of all, I just think she's done a fantastic job. I supported her interim leadership candidacy. I think she's brought a perfect balance of strength and winsomeness to the leadership role. And that's the key for us. Our adversaries on the left are always going to make out parties of the center-right as the nasty party. That's the narrative. That's the line, not just here, but in the States, in Britain and Australia, and in other developed democracies. And that is why it is so important for conservative parties to almost overcompensate with a tone that is winsome. The real archetype for this was Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And I think Rona's kind of doing that balance perfectly. She's eminently likable. She is radiates a kind of civility. But when she needs to be with Justin Trudeau, she's firm and she's tough and uncompromising. So I think she would be a great leader permanently. I understand she doesn't want to do that. I support my colleague Scott Reid's effort to amend the Conservative Party constitution to at least make it an option, not just for her, but for other interim leaders in the future, should conditions warrant them becoming the permanent leader. And whether I run or not, I think it would be great to have her in the race.
Right. I wonder if... You talked about the loss being demoralizing for Conservatives. Of course it was. And some of that change in mindset needs to happen. There needs to be a renewal. A party that's in power for nearly 10 years grows barnacles on it. It starts to think a little bit in a bunker mentality, defensively, about tactics and angles instead of the rampant challengers. There's no fire, in a 10-year incumbent government. So some of those changes I think are good. You got to bring in a new generation. But my worry is that there's an overcompensation.
Right.
You talked about Ronald Reagan, who had a smile and a joke, but was a pretty right-wing guy. My fear is that Conservatives mistake sunny ways with abandoning being opponents of the government, truly opposing, and having conservative ideas. Sunny tone, sunny ways, friendly personality, a twinkle in the eye, got it. But I'm worried that people in the party and in the opposition have said, well, okay, don't oppose anything popular with the Liberals. Don't be true conservatives.
That is the challenge. You put your finger on it, and I hope we don't make that mistake as well. History is absolutely consistent on this. Conservative parties that are not conservative do not win. People don't respect inauthenticity in politics. They want a choice and not an echo. And it's an important lesson for us that Stephen Harper, a founder of the Reform Party, the former president of the National Citizens Coalition, along with guys like me, the former president of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, what we would call movement conservatives, conviction conservatives, managed to put together a coalition, a broad coalition, with first-time conservative voters, many of them new Canadians with naturally conservative values, that govern Canada successfully for a decade. The longest minority government in our history, two governments over 6 years, and a successful majority government. So we did not do that by running away from our principles. I think where we went wrong was in too often conveying an adversarial tone, picking enemies instead of making friends. But I think you put your finger on it. It would be a huge, tragic mistake if the Conservative Party were to decide we have to abandon the core tenets of our conservatism in trying to be some kind of a pale pink imitation of the Liberals.
There's a lot of things. A post-mortem is one thing, a Monday morning quarterback is another. I look back on the 10 years of Stephen Harper as Prime Minister. There's some truly great, I think not only is he a good Prime Minister, I think in many ways he'll be regarded as a great Prime Minister. And I can say that, but I can also say there are some things he didn't do. The CBC now employs half of all journalists in Canada, and the other half are sort of polishing up their resumes to go work there. Foreign-funded NGOs, there were 113 of them, 113 third-party campaign groups against the Conservatives in the last election, only won 4 of them.
Right.
The courts, Stephen Harper appointed most of the judges on the Supreme Court. That court and lower courts took every opportunity to undermine the Conservative initiative. If the media is against you, if the political culture is against you, if the non-partisan civil society is against you, if the judges are against you, can a party even win? If you had Ronald Reagan revived in some miracle, could he even win in that kind of a landscape?
Well, it's never easy, but I'll tell you, where I have my expertise, if you will, is amongst new Canadians, the overwhelming majority of whom have deeply intuitive conservative values in the way they live their lives, and in their values, profound entrepreneurship, sense of personal responsibility, work ethic, devotion to family and not the state as the basic institution of society, intolerance of criminality. The vast majority of new Canadians don't buy into identity politics and political correctness. They support integration. They supported our immigration reforms. Many of them come from corrupt and authoritarian societies, and they embraced our principled democratic foreign policy. So I think there remains a huge opportunity for us to be a majority coalition by reaching out to that growing segment of Canadians. By the way, Ezra, in both 2011 and 2015, you won't hear this from the CBC, but in both of those elections, we won a higher percentage of votes amongst new Canadians, immigrants, than we did amongst people born in Canada. So to the extent that our demographic future is characterized by immigration, I take that as an optimistic sign if we can properly reach out and to new Canadians and make them turn their small c conservative values into large c conservative voting. The big challenge we have, for which I don't have an easy answer, is how to address the prevailing political attitudes of millennials. And I have to give credit to the Liberals. Justin Trudeau's legalizing pot and the optics and style of his campaign connected with a large number of first-time under 30 age voters who I think have come through. I think it's the first generation to come through a schooling system where many of them have been hardwired with collectivist ideas, with watching Michael Moore documentaries, with identity politics from from their primary and secondary schools to universities. That's kind of a cultural challenge for any conservative party, any party of the center right, and we've got to figure out how to break that nut.
One of the antidotes to that millennial leftism are new immigrants. I remember going to an anti-pipeline rally in Vancouver. There were about 1,000 people there, and I remarked to my Sun News Network crew at the time.
Probably the whitest event you've been to in a long time.
In Vancouver, there were only 2 visible minorities. And
in a city that's over 50% visible
yeah,
minority.
I mean, it was whiter than the Klan. And I thought, well, because all the new immigrants to Vancouver, the Chinese kids, South Asian kids, you know, they're working hard, and their parents, so you didn't come here to be anti-pipeline. You know, success is good. So so in some ways, I accept your premise that, first of all, I accept your statistics that minorities voted conservative, and my own observations is that a lot of the liberalism is sort of a luxurious, postmodern affectation that's become a political fashion. But there is one thing when you talk about immigrants that I must ask you about. You were immigration minister, and certainly the outreach hand of the Prime Minister, and you brought in tremendous loyal, patriotic, conservative-minded immigrants by the hundred of thousands. But you also doubled the Muslim population of Canada without sorting Islamists from liberal Democrat Muslims who want to be reformists or moderates. And so while there's many wonderful, to me the best Canadian citizen I've ever met is Raheel Raza. The most patriotic, most loving, most Canadian, it's maple syrup in her veins. But there's also people we brought in from other countries who do not share our liberal values, let alone conservative values. They don't believe in democratic values at all. They weren't screened. They had paper applications. They weren't even met. Is that perhaps the greatest failure of the last 10 years? Is we doubled the Muslim population of Canada without sorting Muslim liberals, Muslim Democrats from Islamists?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure your stat is accurate. You've taken, you've inferred that from immigration patterns from majority Muslim countries, and many of those who came from such countries, like Iraq and Pakistan, for example, from Iran, were from the minority communities who are often persecuted. The refugee programs that I created as Minister of Immigration were focused on vulnerable religious minority communities who are victims of persecution and sometimes
That's
genocide.
Refugees, but what about general immigration?
Well, listen, Ezra, this is a country where whether you're a conservative or a liberal, I don't believe we can support arbitrarily screening people on the basis of their religion or ethnicity. We have to treat people fairly under our law, regardless of their religion or ethnicity. And I understand the point you raise. How do we deal then with the challenge of the small minority who might arrive here, who not only disagree with, but perhaps even despise the basic liberal democratic values of our society? How do we deal with that challenge? There is no easy answer to that question. In Holland, they started trying to compel would-be immigrants to watch a video that included images of topless beaches and gay pride marches. In Australia, they had a obligation to sign your agreement to a statement of Australian values, essentially core liberal democratic values that the vast majority of Canadians would share. I looked at these different efforts to qualitatively screen out people who might believe women are property rather than people, or might actually hate the idea of religious pluralism and tolerance. And I found there is simply no easy way of doing it. Now, what we did...
There's no easy way, but we're not doing anything.
Well, that's not quite true. First of all, we tightened up security screening radically.
I'm not talking about security and violence and terrorism. I'm talking about people who believe in Sharia law, who don't like Jews, who believe in God's law, not secular law. I'm talking about values, not violence.
But I think the security dimension is important because that is one area where we can legitimately discriminate against people who may pose a security risk to the country. And we brought in biometric fingerprint visa requirement. We're bringing in electronic travel authorization, information sharing with the United States, an exit entry information system, the faster deportation of foreign criminals, the revocation of citizenship from convicted terrorists, and a whole number of other measures which combined radically improved the security screening of would-be immigrants or visitors to Canada. That's a point that I think deserves noting. Secondly, we raised the bar for citizenship because that's the point where we can apply a screen. We give ourselves the right to deny citizenship to people who commit criminal offences while they're permanent residents in Canada. Believe it or not, that was not the case before. And we brought in a real, meaningful, substantive Canadian knowledge test, which also, for the first time, introduced the whole dimension of Canadian values. We talk about barbaric cultural practices. That phrase was first used in our citizenship guide, Discover Canada, in a section that says that Canada's tolerance and diversity do not extend to certain barbaric cultural practices, including so-called honor crimes, female genital mutilation, spousal abuse. Such practices are condemned under Canadian law and are severely punished. We made every new Canadian read that, familiarize themselves with it, be tested on it to demonstrate their proficiency in English or French, and changed the selection of economic immigrants to better select people with the capacity and intention to integrate. Now, none of these are the kinds of hard measures that will satisfy you, but I think that's the best we could do in the context of the Charter of Rights and our obligation to treat people equally before the law.
Fair enough. I have one last question for you. I read the news. I'm depressed every day because I see the best things about Canada slowly being undone. And it's almost like that ancient Roman emperor's policy of damnatio memoriae, of when the new emperor would depose the old one, any law they passed is repealed, any statue of them is destroyed, any coins,
defaced.
To absolutely, literally to destroy the memory. And I feel like the 10 years, the good things of the 10 years, are systematically being peeled back. Some are a matter of opinion, but some of them, I think, go to core Canadian values. Some of those perhaps are popular changes. I guess my question would be this. Is there something Justin Trudeau has done in the last 7 months that you think is not only politically objectionable to Conservatives, but might be so objectionable to Canadians that it may plant the seeds for Trudeau's political demise? Is there something he's doing? Is there a path he's chosen that is not just red team, blue team, but is so contrary to Canada's interests that it could contain within it the seeds of his defeats?
Yes, on the two biggest issues, the economy and national security. We're living in very uncertain times in the global economy, and we have a prime minister now who actually is going around the world and here at home talking down our core historic industries. He sneeringly dismisses them, as do the cognoscenti in parts of urban Canada. He dismisses and derides what he calls the old economy, by which he means traditional manufacturing and the extractive industries like oil and gas, mining and forestry. And he seems to have this kind of almost a parody vision of a future economy based on, Richard Florida ideas about creative hubs and people serving soy lattes to one another.
And innovation centers.
Right, exactly. It's all gibberish, it's all nonsense, and it's all typified by what the disaster of the Ontario provincial Liberal government's economic policy. Higher energy prices, which are helping to drive out core industrial manufacturing industries from our industrial heartland. If these people continue to pursue policies like this, almost prejudicially attacking our core extractive industries, our traditional manufacturing industries, I think they may be responsible for a kind of Trumpian populist response. If you're a typical Trump voter in the U.S. Rust Belt, a guy in his 40s or 50s who has lost his job, same kind of job his father and grandfather had, whose community is in irreversible economic decline, you want to find somebody to blame. And that's what I think we see happening in the United States. And I will hold people like Kathleen Wynne and Justin Trudeau responsible. I think they may be very close to massively overstepping on that. The frustration that I hear from good, hard-working guys and gals in Alberta who've worked in the energy industry, to have a government that actually is attacking the very industry, who say, as Justin Trudeau did at Davos, the international conference of the jet set, that Canada should be resourceful, our economy should be based on resourcefulness and not resources. You know what the most resourceful industry is in terms of innovation, science and tech, research and development? It is the oil and gas industry. They have brought about modern miracles in the capacity to extract resources with a shrinking footprint. He doesn't understand any of that. And if you follow the trajectory of his economic and energy policy, and use the Wynne government as a kind of model for that, I think they'll be going dangerously offside. Huge new taxes, a new basically doubling CPP taxes, carbon taxes, reckless fiscal policy. They promised $25 billion in new debt in 4 years, and they're already planning for $130 billion. So, on the economy, I think they have a big chance of getting it completely wrong. And on national security, I don't think he takes these issues seriously at all. I think Irwin Cotler was right. Irwin Cotler, the former Liberal MP and minister who has universal respect, when he said that he does not think Justin Trudeau understands the reality of evil. Now, in Liberal...
When did he say this? When did Cotler say this?
He said this sometime in the last year.
Publicly he said this?
Yeah. And the point is that he understands that just there's a kind of naivete, which people find charming about Justin Trudeau, where he does that is not reflected in a serious appreciation for the real threats in national security. I only have to offer one proof point. When we were debating, I was Minister of Defense, and we were debating the deployment of the Royal Canadian Air Force to participate in an international coalition to strike a genocidal terrorist organization, trying to wipe off the face of the earth the indigenous minorities of Mesopotamia. You could not be talking about a more serious moral and security matter. And what did Justin Trudeau say as leader of the third party? He said it was all about Stephen Harper wanting to whip out his CF-18s and show us how big they are. In other words, he retreated to the cheeky frat boy when faced with probably the most serious security issue that we've discussed in this country in the past couple of years.
Feminist issue. What bothers me is he just won't shut up about being a feminist, which is a little bit odd in itself. In 2016, a guy, I'm feminist, I'm feminist, I'm feminist. Boy, you're running pretty hot on that. It's so unusual. We all believe in equality, but the key issue for misogyny in the world right now is the rape, slavery, and the gender apartheid that the Islamic State represents. The key litmus test on feminism, he's an anti-feminist, or at least is by practice.
Ezra, when I was Minister of Immigration, I opened the largest refugee resettlement program since the Vietnamese boat people of 1975 by admitting 25,000 primarily Iraqi victims of genocide from the minority community, the indigenous minority communities like the Assyrians and the Armenians, the Yazidis, and others. Justin Trudeau has completely shut that down and instead moved to a program focused on Syrians out of, in the future it'll be refugee camps where the minorities don't go. And here's the point. In the program that I had designed, we were hoping to be able to bring in hundreds of Yazidi Iraqi rape victims, women and girls who had become sexual slaves of the so-called Islamic State, Daesh, in Iraq and Syria, who are now living in deplorable circumstances in the Kurdish region in northern Iraq. So that's the direction in which our resettlement program is going. Justin Trudeau shut that down. And when asked during the campaign whether he thought it was appropriate to follow the conservative prioritization of resettlement of genocide victims, he said he thought that was disgusting. I think that tells you how disordered his priorities are.
I remember that clip. I have one last question. You've been generous with your time and you've answered some tough questions. I appreciate you letting me ask them and being on my mind. I think that Justin Trudeau has an emotional intelligence to him. He knows how to connect with people, especially young people. I think he's a quick study. He can memorize a Wikipedia entry about quantum computing and read it like a dramatic actor would read a few lines of a script. I think he's got some talent.
As Michael Ignatieff said, he's an actor who knows how to recite his lines, and this is the role he was born to play.
I think that's accurate. But I don't think he's well briefed. I don't think he's a serious man. I don't think he really thought of work. I mean, he once told an Iranian newspaper that he visited 90 countries.
As a backpacker.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible life of leisure and having the trust fund lawyers and accountants take care of things. So I don't think, I mean, we know he didn't write his own book. That was written by Jonathan Kay of the National Post.
He didn't disclose that, right?
Well, yeah, it came out later. So he's never written a book. He's never started a business. He's never been known for policy, but he can play the role, as Ignatieff says. So who is the scriptwriter? Who is the director of this theater? And my hunch is it's Gerald Butts, who was Dalton McGuinty's principal secretary, who was so closely associated with Trudeau during the campaign and is now the principal secretary of the Prime Minister's office. I believe, and you tell me if this is just my partisan dramatics coming out of me, I believe that Gerald Butts is the de facto Prime Minister. I believe that what Gerald Butts says policy-wise and message-wise is generally what Trudeau will repeat. I don't think it's the other way around.
I don't think what you're suggesting is controversial. I think it's the widely accepted theory around Ottawa. And, one practical way where this makes a difference is that Prime Minister Trudeau gives lip service to wanting to get market access for Canadian oil, which represents potentially hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars of future value. It represents untold numbers of hospitals and schools and new university programs. It represents our future, our ability to cope with the aging of our population in the way that most other developed countries cannot. And yet I do not believe they are serious at all about that. I think that the real hidden agenda with respect to our future economy is in an ideological zeal to basically shut down and strangle the trillions of dollars of wealth represented by
What's that
oil and
motivated
gas.
by? I mean, Gerald Butts, his picture on Twitter is him in a private jet. He and these eco jet setters fly around. What's the motivation? Why do they favor OPEC oil over Canadian ethical oil?
You're the guy who's written a book about
I'm
this,
trying to
Ezra.
understand. What motivates Gerald Butts? Is it a Marxism? I know he praised Thomas Piketty's book on neo-communism. Is it an alienism? Is it a countercultural radicalism? Like, what's the end? What is it?
I don't try to guess at other people's motives, but I do know this, that Jean Chrétien, who signed the Kyoto Accord with completely unrealistic carbon reduction targets for Canada, it was closely associated with the Power Corporation, a Canadian company, and Maurice Strong, who facilitated the construction of new coal-fired power plants in China, which collectively are producing more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire Canadian economy. So I find a fundamental contradiction in much of what's going on. But I will say this, those values are not the mainstream Canadian values. And I believe we're now finally seeing the end, that the Wynne-McGuinty government's radical agenda has finally jumped the proverbial shark. They're on their way out. And I think if the federal Liberals overreach with their ideological zeal on these issues in attacking good Canadian jobs and our long-term economic prospects, Canadians will wake up to it and they'll pay a price.
Yeah. You've been very generous with your time, and you've answered a wide range of questions, including some that I would call tough ones. We're rooting for you. We're very curious what you do. We think that Canada needs strong conservative talent, and wherever you choose to go, we'll be following it with great interest.
Thanks, Ezra.
Nice to
Cheers.
see you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.